When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time.
Expert witnesses are the golden thread that runs through cases that every single conviction needs.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
There are so many important pieces of evidence: paint evidence, glass, fibre evidence.
They search harder and look deeper using the very latest techniques.
If I can work out how old those insects are, that's going to give me the minimum time since death.
This is the inside story of how science helped solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
It really was becoming the last throw of the dice.
Nothing's going to bring her back, but she'd had the justice that she rightly deserved.
This is the story of the expert witness. Today, we're in Wales to reveal how an expert witness helped solve 3 notorious cold cases after it seemed forensic science was getting nowhere.
It was the most hostile meeting I've ever had with the police.
I am not a murderer.
And forensic analysis by a gemstone expert uncovers the fatal flaw in a diamond investment scam that wiped out some people's life savings.
Some of the losses that they were facing were absolutely catastrophic.
DNA is not a bad place to start. It's just, it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to go via something else.
I was aware that a number of experts had looked at these cases in the past, so I knew I was in for a difficult time.
Pembrokeshire, Wales, 2006. Detective Steve Wilkins has been assigned to run a new cold case investigation, Operation Ottawa. Its objective is to crack 3 serious and possibly connected crimes, each unsolved for at least a decade.
The double murder of Richard and Helen Thomas at Skeletal Park in 1985, the murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon in 1989, and also an attack on 5 children in 1996.
There had been extensive investigations of all 3 cases over the years, but no one had been charged. The crimes became notorious and cast a shadow over this close-knit rural community. Now, Steve wanted to take an entirely fresh approach to the investigation. He began housing his dedicated team in a disused building at Pembroke Docks.
This is where Operation Ottawa was born. It's quite spooky being back here after all these years. 6 people came here. They were people that I knew would pay attention to detail, because at that stage it was mainly around identifying what we had available, what exhibits, what material was available.
Operation Ottawa's headquarters were at the centre of a small triangle where the 3 crimes took place. The first was the double murder of a local brother and sister in 1985.
A couple of miles that way towards Milford Haven, we have Skeletal Park, which is the scene where Richard and Helen Thomas were murdered.
During the crime, their manor house home, Skeletal Park, was set on fire. The most notorious case was 4 years later in 1989. 2 tourists were killed in an infamous attack that became known as the Coastal Path Murders.
Within 500 yards of us, Peter and Gwenda Dixon were confronted by a man with a sawn-off shotgun. They were robbed. Gwenda was sexually assaulted, and then they were shot 5 times.
Peter and Gwenda both died at the scene. Then, in 1996, in nearby Milford Haven, there was a 3rd crime.
5 children who were playing one night were confronted by a masked man with a double-barrel shotgun who robbed them.
2 of the girls were also sexually assaulted, For Steve, the close proximity of all three violent and unusual crimes was impossible to ignore.
The geography was a significant factor in linking the offences. Certain offenders have what we call anchor points, is that they feel safe in areas. They know the escape routes, they know how to get to areas, so they feel comfortable offending in that area. So for me, this was a local person.
One such suspect was John Cooper. He lived in the area, had carried out burglaries there, and had served time for armed robbery. Cooper's home had been thoroughly searched as part of the investigations into the robberies.
There was a lot of evidence taken from his house, but also outside his house and along the hedgerows were items of jewellery, gloves, which clearly he had discarded or he'd sorted through as he was leaving the scene and going back to his home address.
Steve had thousands of exhibits from the three crimes and still more from Cooper's burglaries. He had a hunch these exhibits had evidence to link all the cold cases and that forensic science could reveal it. He turned to Angela Gallup, but could offer only limited resources.
Steve Wilkins said that all he wanted us to do was just find him a golden nugget of DNA. He said, we haven't got very much money to spend on this case, but we desperately need to, solve it. And so just restrict yourself to DNA.
DNA was an investigative tool that had advanced greatly since the original inquiries into the three crimes. So Steve was hoping for a fast result.
In the late 80s, early 90s, you needed a large amount of blood, something the size of a 10p piece. But nowadays, you don't even need to be able to see the blood or the body fluid to get a result.
But months later, Angela's team had still found no DNA that linked any of the crimes.
With forensic science, sometimes you strike lucky straight away, and the thing that you examine gives you the result that you're looking for, which will sort out what you need it to sort out. But other times it takes a whole lot longer than that.
After a whole year and a half with no results and the cost of the investigation mounting, Steve was under pressure.
At that stage, I'm probably over £1 million then in relation to the forensic budget. I've got a police authority asking me questions. I've got chief officers asking me questions. And also, we need to come to a point where I felt that I wasn't sure we were getting actually the best out of the science.
He rang me one day and he said, you've been doing this case for 18 months. You haven't found anything. I'm going to take it off you and give it to someone else because I can't continue with you.
With the investigation at a stalemate, tensions between the detectives and expert witnesses were at breaking point. Steve called an emergency meeting.
It was the most hostile meeting I've ever had with the police. There was a whole team of them there. It was very much crunch time so far as our investigation was concerned. But I just was very keen that he and his colleagues understood the broader canvas that is forensic science.
It was a very frank exchange, I think. Angela felt that we'd kept her in what she calls DNA straitjacket.
I managed to persuade them just to give us a little bit more latitude and a little bit more funding to do some fibre work.
I think it was a very, very helpful meeting because it was quite clear that Angela had ideas, she was thinking outside the box.
Angela had staked her reputation on this new approach. Now she needed the very best fibre expert she could find and turned to expert witness Roger Robson.
I was aware that a number of experts had looked at these cases in the past, so I knew I was in for a difficult time.
Roger began with the Coastal Path murders, in which Peter and Gwenda Dixon were killed. He asked for details of the exhibits recovered by the original investigation in 1989. Roger was looking for anything that might offer the chance of recovering fibres.
Steve's team came up with a list, and on that list were quite a number of branches that had been used to conceal Gwenda Dixon's body.
The killer had broken the branches, and Roger thought it possible the thorns could have snagged fibres from his clothes. So he began a forensic analysis.
There were these populations of dark blue acrylic fibres that we were finding repeatedly on the different branches. Well, what does that mean? The perpetrator was wearing gloves. So have any gloves actually been seized from this suspect's house? And they managed to collect and exhibit 11 different pairs of gloves. One by one, I eliminated them until I came up with one exhibit, which had the exhibit number BB109. That particular exhibit number will probably stick with me forever. When I looked at this glove, I found that the constituent fibres were a close match to the population of the fibres on the branches. But it was that one glove, BB109, that opened up the whole investigation.
The fibres linked Cooper and his glove to the Coastal Path murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon in 1989. Now Roger needed to look for similar fibres connected to the other crimes. He turned first to the assault of the children at Milford Haven in 1996.
I'll look at the fibres on the victims of the assaults case from Milford Haven, and if they come out the same, then I know that these are most likely to have come from the same source. And lo and behold, next thing you find the match. That was quite mind-blowing, to be honest.
Roger was spectacular. It's significant when you get that sort of connection. This is quite clearly that the person wearing those gloves has come into contact with the victims.
That was just brilliant. It was concrete evidence of John Cooper's involvement, so it was extremely important.
For the first time, the team had forensic evidence to link 2 of the 3 cases. The investigation was back on track, with another breakthrough on the way.
It was microscopically searching some surface debris recovered from a pair of shorts from John Cooper's home address that we managed to notice not only the fibres aspect of it, but also we found a tiny flake of what looked like blood.
The shorts were from Cooper's house, but who did the blood belong to? There was only a tiny speck, but that was enough for forensic biologist Philip Avenel to begin a search for DNA.
We got the microscope out, we took the shorts out, very careful examination, and on the surface of the shorts, sort of around this area on the back of the leg, we found a very weak, dilute red stain, which had the appearance of blood. We did a KM test on the back of the shorts before we cut that out. The KM test, we take a piece of absorbent paper, we will fold it up just to give us a nice, neat corner to be able to pick anything up on. We'll then take our blood stain and we will rub the paper against it. Then we'll take our first chemical. There's 2 chemicals in the Castlemayor test. One of them is hydrogen peroxide, and so when you add that to the blood, it acts like an enzyme and it actually breaks down the hydrogen peroxide to release oxygen. And when we add the Castlemayor reagent, if there's an abundance of oxygen present, then it will turn pink. And you'll see a purple coloration change there where the blood flake was. We cut that out and put that in for DNA testing. That also came back matching Peter Dixon. The probability for that particular DNA result we had was less than 1 in a billion.
Fibres linked a glove to the Coastal Path murders and to the Milford Haven assaults. Blood connected a pair of shorts to the Coastal Path murders. Both were found in John Cooper's house. But could forensic analysis link the same shorts to the third crime, the Scoverston murders?
The shorts suddenly became a treasure trove in relation to forensic science. We'd already got a connection to the murders of the Dixons, and of course now we were on a rich vein of hits, or forensic hits, in relation to fibre evidence. And in the pocket of the shorts, they recovered a clump of fibres.
Roger Robson studied the fibres and compared them to exhibits from all 3 crimes. He discovered they were a match for a sock worn by Richard Thomas, one of the victims in the 1985 Scoverston murders.
What we did find was a little population of polyester fibres, and he probably moved Richard Thomas by the feet and then afterwards put his hand in the pocket of the shorts, and that evidence stayed within those shorts all that time.
Angela's promise to deliver results using forensic fibre evidence was paying off.
The links started coming in, I mean, in a way that absolutely staggered us. And they were linking the victims, you know, with the hedgerow items and with John Cooper's house directly and via the hedgerow items. We had enormous numbers. It was a myriad of textile fibre links.
Evidence was building up against John Cooper, but Steve had a hunch there was more. Police were in possession of a shotgun used by Cooper in an armed robbery. The children assaulted in Milford Haven said their attacker also carried a shotgun.
One or two of the victims that were attacked in the field near Milford Haven described the fact that the gun had been painted black. When we started looking at it in earnest, we took it out of its bag and we noticed in the bottom of the bag that quite a lot of the black paint had started to flake off the gun. So we thought, well, we'll have a quick look at those. And it was when our brilliant searcher, April Robson, started looking at the flakes from the bottom of the bag, and she popped them under the low-power microscope, and she noticed that there was a reddish cast to the inner surface of them. In other words, the surface that would have been in contact with the gun barrels. And so she tested that, obviously, immediately for blood, and it gave us a positive result. We did DNA profiling on that, and that showed that it very likely to have come from Peter Dixon. And we then went back to the gun and found some more blood, actually on the gun itself. And that was also Peter Dixon's.
It was the final piece of the jigsaw to show all three crimes were linked and that Cooper was responsible for them all.
Suddenly, we had the murder weapon. And this was a gun for which he'd already served a sentence, which he'd used in a previous armed robbery, and where the MO was very, very similar to the Ottawa offences. So to put that in the middle of the other evidence, it was crucial and significant.
This footage shows the moment detectives apprehended John Cooper.
Serial killer John Cooper is finally arrested.
While in police custody, he continued to maintain his innocence.
I am not a murderer. I don't care whether you believe it or not. I am not a murderer.
But with their wealth of forensic evidence, Steve and his team didn't need a confession. In 2011, 5 years after Steve Wilkins launched Operation Ottawa, John Cooper was convicted of the 1985 murders of Richard and Helen Thomas, the 1989 murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, and the 1996 assault at gunpoint of children in Milford Haven.
2 decades after the murders, Cooper has finally been brought to justice. The judge told him his crimes were of such evil wickedness that life in prison would mean just that.
Roger and Angela, for me, they will always be my heroes. They were the people that we worked very, very close with for a number of years. And they were the ones that, because of their training, because of their professionalism, because of their expertise, were able to provide me with the evidence to put a case before a jury and reach a successful conclusion.
The work was extremely satisfying. In fact, I think it was probably the most satisfying case of my career.
We did a jolly good job. There was a few drinks to celebrate the outcome at the end of the day.
We gave this part of the world back to the local community because they can confidently now go out and say, well, the person responsible will never see the light of day again. So for me, it was very important and very important to local community and economy as well.
Diamonds are beautiful and also very valuable. So the job of the expert is to actually determine what the fair value is, and it seems the criminal's intent is to overinflate it and thereby cheat the unsuspecting victim.
In 2014, gemologist Richard Taylor is contacted by Trading Standards. They want him to investigate what they believe is an unusual scam involving precious gemstones. A company called Ethical Elegance has convinced amateur wine collectors to trade expensive bottles of wine for rare coloured diamonds. Ethical Elegance promised massive returns.
All of the victims of this case had invested in fine wines. But most of the investors were at a loss to know exactly what to do, whether to keep the wines, whether to sell them. Out of the blue, they received a phone call talking to them about investing in coloured diamonds. The salesman would say to them, we have this wonderful opportunity where if you transfer the wines to us, we can get a valuation and sell them, but we won't give you the proceeds. We will actually use those proceeds to buy a coloured diamond. It was this two-stage process to convert their wine into cash.
14 wine collectors agreed to hand over their very expensive wines. One investor handed over wine worth more than £85,000. But months later, few had received their diamonds in return. Those that had were suspicious of their true value and began to think they had been scammed. It's something Carla Goodfellow at the Birmingham Assay Office is hearing about more and more.
The scams and frauds that we have seen involving gemstones and jewellery, definitely from our experience, targeted vulnerable people who really are using their life savings, maybe their inheritance that they're hoping to pass on to their family, or actually putting them into severe financial difficulties themselves.
But was Ethical Elegance scamming its customers? Some did receive diamonds, so expert witness Richard Taylor ran a series of tests to see what those gems were worth. He began by determining if they were natural or grown in a lab, as he demonstrates on these sample stones.
We're going to put 3 stones in, and you're just going to see the results that we get. And it's actually the phosphorescence, which is the key test that this is using. So the first image we see of the 3 stones is just simple fluorescence. So we're exciting it with UV light, and we're seeing any visual response. You could think that actually testing a diamond was a simple process, but actually it's all more like doing a jigsaw puzzle. It's that challenge of actually working through the problem. The top diamond is phosphorescing in a bright blue colour, and actually that's characteristic of a synthetic diamond.
A second test, shown here on another sample gem, assesses the colour quality of the diamond to reveal whether it's natural or synthetic.
On here we've got a red diamond. It's held in blue tack so that we don't let any of the other light get through, only light that's passed through the diamond. We're pouring the liquid nitrogen into the container, which will cool down the diamond. But what's really interesting and special about those graphs are those individual little peaks can tell me, one peak can tell me whether it's a synthetic or whether it's a natural. This is quite a smooth curve, which is, in its own way, for a red diamond, somewhat suspicious. We can identify this is not a natural coloured stone.
I think the prevalence now of diamonds which are not diamonds has very much gone up. Synthetic and laboratory grown are probably one of the industry's biggest issues at the moment. It's only by using specialist equipment that you can actually detect the diamond is laboratory grown rather than natural.
When Richard examined the gems sent to customers by Ethical Elegance, he confirmed they were, at least, natural diamonds. But were they as valuable as the thousands of pounds worth of wine people had exchanged them for? There was one obvious cause for concern.
Firstly was the size of the stones. The stones that had been supplied to the individuals were quite small stones, and to be worth 10, 20, 30,000 pounds, they would have had to have been larger.
Then there was the colouring, a significant factor in determining a diamond's worth.
Most diamonds go from a kind of faint yellow colour through to an absolutely white, colourless stone. And in that range, the most valuable is the white stone. But the really, really valuable stones are the ones that have other colours. And if the quality of the colour is really good, and if the size of the diamond is even quite modest, it can be an unbelievably valuable and expensive stone.
Ethical Elegance promised its customers diamonds of rare and valuable colouring, so Richard assessed each stone one by one.
A lot of the diamonds were actually yellows, which the yellows do have values, but they're out of all the colours, they're probably the least valuable. So you've got lots of small yellow diamonds, and you just looked at them and thought, never in a month of Sundays am I going to be able to find 10, 20, 50,000 pounds worth of value in these stones.
Richard's conclusion, the diamonds customers received were worth only a fraction of the value of the wine they had exchanged them for.
The ballpark was between 6 and 10% of the estimated value. So a £10,000 investment, they were getting between £600 and £1,000 back.
Richard's evidence left trading standards in no doubt. Ethical Elegance was scamming its customers. The company was closed down, and in 2016, its owner, Craig O'Driscoll, was tried for fraudulent trading. Faced with the weight of Richard Taylor's evidence, O'Driscoll pleaded guilty. He was given a suspended sentence and disqualified from trading for 13 years. But for some of his victims, the devastating consequences of O'Driscoll's scam will be even longer lasting.
Some of the losses that they were facing were absolutely catastrophic. There were several individuals where literally it was their pension, their whole pension had been invested in these wines.
I think a lot of people are led to believe that maybe jewellery and precious gemstones can be a good investment. I have to say, frauds and scams that involve diamonds or gemstones, precious metals, is much more common than we would like it to be. And it is a real shame that people are being scammed in this way.
When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time.
Expert witnesses are the golden thread that runs through cases that every single conviction needs.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
There are so many important pieces of evidence: paint evidence, glass, fibre evidence.
They search harder and look deeper using the very latest techniques.
If I can work out how old those insects are, that's going to give me the minimum time since death.
This is the inside story of how science helped solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
It really was becoming the last throw of the dice.
Nothing's going to bring her back, but she'd had the justice that she rightly deserved.
This is the story of the expert witness. In this programme, when smouldering human remains are found in a field in Hertfordshire, it's a policeman's hunch and a diligent expert witness that helps catch the killers.
I've been to many scenes of crimes, and many of them have been in remote locations. And I've wished that the trees and the bushes surrounding the crime scene could speak to me. And on this occasion, they did.
And how forensic fibre analysis by an expert witness revealed evidence to prove who was really responsible for causing a fatal road crash.
On the brake pedal cover of the Frontera, we found a brown plastic coating mark, which matched the female occupant's boots.
By counting and identifying pollen grains, you're able to envisage a place. You can tell the police a lot about what's happened at a crime scene. And you can say, this person has contacted this kind of place. So you could say to me, I never went there. You give me your shoes and I can say, well, there's a high probability that you did.
June 1995, Hertfordshire. Police detective Paul Dockley is called to the Amwell Place farm. A worker has discovered a partially burnt body in a ditch.
The story was that a farmer and his cowhand had seen smoke coming up from the centre of the field and had gone across to investigate what the cause was. And when they get there, they see there's a body in the ditch.
The body had been set on fire sometime previously and was now smouldering.
In 1995, this was an arable field with maize in it. It's now a livestock field with cows. And this is the actual spot where the body was in the ditch. Now, obviously, this ditch has been freshly dug out, but there were bushes on either side, and the fire was down in the bottom of the ditch. I had no idea who this guy was. Nobody else did. This is almost like a jigsaw with a piece of blue sky. That's exactly what it's like. And so we were working with that piece of blue sky.
When a crime scene is outside like this one, it's at the mercy of the weather. Rainfall or winds could destroy valuable evidence. Paul knew he needed to act quickly.
I really was racking my brain to think, what could be the best evidence that I could extract in the 24 hours I've got? And when you consider the body was probably put there overnight, the previous night, so I'm already 12 hours into this investigation.
With the clock ticking, Paul had a radical idea.
There's a thing called traces, trace elements, and it's taught to us detectives that if you touch anything, you're likely to leave a trace element, either your clothing on something at the scene or something from the scene on your clothing. I'm a hay fever sufferer, and it was one of those pollen-laden days that us hay fever sufferers really dread. And I said to the scenes of crime sergeant, I want to take pollen samples.
Paul's hunch was that whoever left the body in the ditch must have come into contact with the unique variety of pollen nearby, and then carried that pollen from the scene stuck to their clothes, shoes or body. Paul hoped that matching pollen profiles could later prove a suspect was at the scene of the crime.
I do think there was some sort of trepidation because we'd never done this before. I honestly didn't know what I was looking at, but I just thought, I've got one hit at this scene.
Investigators took samples of soil from around the body and from the entrance to the field, hoping they would be rich in telltale pollen. But to locate and identify the microscopic grains, they needed an expert.
The Detective Sergeant Scenes of Crime actually contacted Kew Gardens to ask if they knew of somebody who could actually analyse pollen as we'd taken the samples. And they said they knew somebody who was an expert in pollen examination. And this was Professor Pat Wiltshire.
At that time, Patricia Wiltshire was a pollen expert who had spent her career gathering samples from archaeological digs.
I got a telephone call from the police one day, which changed my life, because they asked me to investigate a murder with them. I don't think I'd ever even spoken to a policeman before that. And he said, oh, you said you look at pollen. And I said, yes, I do. I didn't know what I was in for.
Patricia agreed Paul's hunch that pollen could provide evidence to place a suspect at the crime scene was a good one. The key was the unique qualities of the pollen.
First of all, it's tiny and you can't see it. Secondly, it will stick to things because it's a charged particle. So if you brush against it with your clothing, it'll wiggle down into the weave of your clothing. It will stick to your shoes. It will stick to your hair. So it's tiny, you can't see it, and you carry it around with you.
But Patricia wasn't convinced by the team's idea to gather pollen by collecting soil samples from the field.
It was an agricultural soil, and the farmer grew corn there. And to grow crops regularly in fields, you need fertiliser, and you need aeration, you need the soil to be turned over, to be ploughed. So there was oxygen in the soil and fertiliser in the soil. This is all marvellous for microbes to latch onto anything organic and decompose it. So any pollen or any plant remains or anything else that was in that soil would have been decomposed by the microbes. The samples didn't have pollen in them. I didn't expect it, and that was quite disappointing.
Any pollen that was once in the soil had already decomposed. It seemed pollen was not going to crack this case after all. Meanwhile, more conventional detective work was turning up valuable information. The victim was identified as Benson Wilson, a suspected drug dealer well known to the police.
It transpired that Ben Wilson was actually a con man, and he had been advertising that he could develop properties for investors. And there are a number of Chinese investors involved in this case, from both here in the UK and in Singapore and Kuching, who had invested money in the hope that they could make future gains from their investment here in the UK. Sadly, that wasn't the case, because Ben Wilson, being the con man he was, had taken their money but hadn't used it for what it was intended for. In fact, he'd used it for his own ends.
Benson Wilson's death attracted the attention of crime journalist Ronke Phillips.
So from what we know, the detail we know is the victim was employed by a gang because they had lots of money that they needed laundered. We understand he was carrying out his own drug deals and pocketing the money. Now, the gang found out about that and they kidnapped him.
Paul's investigations revealed the gang kidnapped Wilson in the back of a van. They wanted to discuss the missing money. But as they drove across London, things went badly wrong.
So they tied him up, but they tied him up with his legs and arms behind him. Now, he was a pretty big man, and this caused his lungs to collapse and he died.
They quickly changed vehicles to a hire car and fled London with Wilson's body.
They panicked, didn't really know England very well, and thought they were taking him to a dump in Wales. They actually ended up in Hertfordshire at a field.
It was here that they dumped Wilson's body, leaving tyre tracks as they drove across the field.
Detectives managed to establish that those tyre tracks came from a Rover 316 or a similar car, and after a lot of painstaking detective work, they found the car was actually a hire car, and coincidentally the car was due to be auctioned, so they literally got to that car just in time.
For Paul, there was another stroke of luck. The car had not been used by anyone else since the body was dumped. It meant there could still be trace evidence left by gang members inside the car, including pollen. Paul immediately called Patricia Wiltshire.
I took the foot mats out and the pedals off. There were rubber ones, you could just pull them off. Now, anybody that had walked anywhere and driven would have brought the outside in. So whatever was represented outside would have been on the pedals and the foot mats. So I scrubbed them with an antiseptic surfactant to stop microbial activity, to stop the activity of bacteria and fungi. I scrubbed them with toothbrushes until I got sludges. And then I centrifuge and centrifuge and centrifuge until I ended up with pellets at the bottom of tubes. And I analysed those. Oh, wow. Lo and behold, the foot pedals and the foot mats just jumped out.
The results of Patricia's painstaking work were staggering, and this time revealed a wealth of pollen evidence.
It was wonderful because there was a profile of an old hedge and a field edge, an arable field edge. And I was able to describe them in detail.
Patricia now had a profile for the variety of pollens found on the mats and pedals of the hire car. Now she needed to show where this variety of pollens could have come from.
We had to start eliminating, because did this pollen come from somewhere else? So we had to go around different addresses and, oh, it couldn't have come from here, it couldn't have come from there. This, because it's not just one pollen type, it's the whole assemblage.
Paul's case was now resting on Patricia's pollen profile. He was hoping it would prove the suspects in the hire car were not only in the field, but at the very point where the body had been dumped.
The police said to me, would you like to see the place? I said, oh gosh, yes, I would. So they took me there.
We got to the gate and she said to me, don't take me to the scene, I will take you to the scene, which I thought was incredible.
I think there was oak and something else, but it wasn't this right assemblage, and there weren't the right plants at the field edge. So we went on a bit further.
We came along this first part of the hedgerow, just after this oak tree, and Pat's saying, I don't think this is the ditch.
The hedge was wrong. I was disappointed. Oh no, this isn't right. It's similar, but there's an awful lot that's missing, that's in the profile. Further.
After all this work, it now seemed the forensic team's initial scepticism was right. It would be impossible to catch criminals from pollen samples.
And then halfway up the field, I said, oh my gosh, this is the place.
And we got to this point and she said, I can tell you now, there is dogweed, nettle, white nettle. Pat pointed out to all the shrubbery around here and said, this is the exact point of where the body was. And she was totally right.
Patricia's pollen analysis proved that the car had been taken into the field and that the passengers had walked around the very spot where the body had been dumped.
The assemblage and the profile of pollen I got on my slides matched a specific place, because just a few yards that way it was different, just a few yards that way it was different. It was quite specific.
Further forensics found some of Wilson's blood in the car. When combined with the pollen, it was enough for detectives to arrest the gang and have them tried for kidnapping and murder.
Some people would look at this victim and say, look, come on, he was involved in very serious crimes, he was drug dealing. But as far as the detectives working on this case, everyone is an equal. They will put as much work into dealing with a drug dealer as they will with somebody who's considered an ordinary person. At the end, everybody deserves justice.
Patricia Wiltshire's work on this case was groundbreaking and gave rise to a whole new area of forensics.
I thought, well, it's been useful. That's all I thought. And put an evil gang of people away. As far as I knew, that was it. But I was asked to do another case, and then another case, and another case. And eventually, we set up a master's course in forensic archaeological science.
This was a first, and it was a eureka moment for me, really. I've been to many scenes of crimes, and many of them have been in remote locations. And I've wished that the trees and the bushes surrounding the crime scene could speak to me. And on this occasion, they did.
Fibres can associate people with people, it can associate people with places. It also has very high intelligence value. In other words, it can indicate where somebody's been or an object has been. And in some instances, it can actually give us timeframes for when things actually occurred.
August 2006, Cambridgeshire. An horrific three-car crash leaves a stockbroker, Alexander Palmer, dead and others seriously injured. Mr. Palmer was a 36-year-old father of two. He was returning from work in the city to his home in Suffolk when a red Vauxhall crossed the central reservation and struck his blue Audi. Mr. Palmer was declared dead at the scene. The collision was right on the patch of crime journalist Chris Summers.
The M11 in Cambridgeshire is a very popular route from London up to East Anglia. And on this day, there was a massive pile-up of cars. A Vauxhall Frontera crossed the central reservation, struck an Audi coming in the other direction, and one person was killed from that car, and there was many other people injured.
Both occupants of the Frontera, Anne Milton and Michael Wall, were left with serious injuries, but survived. They were later questioned by police investigating who was responsible for the crash.
When she was interviewed by police, Anne Milton explained that that day she was on her way to Norfolk to visit her partner in jail. She claimed that she'd been a passenger in the Frontera when they suddenly lost control and went into the central reservation.
Detectives suspected Anne Milton herself was at the wheel, but had no evidence to back that up.
It became clear that Anne Milton had very good reasons to say that she wasn't the driver and Michael Wall was the driver, because it turned out that she'd been banned from driving. So if she was driving that day, she was driving while disqualified, which is a very serious offence. And she also had cocaine and methadone in her system. When the police were investigating this case, there was no CCTV cameras on that part of the motorway. There was no dash cam footage that could explain who was driving. Anne Milton was saying that she was not the driver. It was extremely difficult for the police to prove otherwise until the scientists came along.
Leading those scientists was expert witness Dr. Ray Palmer, a specialist in investigating road traffic accidents.
The police were suspicious of the female occupant's account of the events leading up to the collision. They had some information to suggest that, in fact, that she was the driver, and indeed that the male occupant was, in fact, a passenger. And what they needed us to do was to either corroborate that or refute it. So, in other words, was she or wasn't she the driver at the time of the collision?
But the common forensic tools, such as DNA, were of little use to Ray due to the violent nature of road traffic accidents.
It's a very dynamic situation. The car's often spinning, overturning, or occupants are being thrown about. So things like blood may be thrown about onto different surfaces, and it can be very confusing. It's not to say they're never useful, but very often they're not. And likewise, with simple fibre transfers to seats, in situations where one or more of the occupants has use of the vehicle, it will not give you any time-specific information.
Ray, however, had one weapon in his arsenal of forensic tools that could give police the answers they needed.
Fibroplastic fusions and plastic coating marks occur when a textile surface comes in contact with a plastic surface. When there's high energies and frictional forces generated, such as in a road traffic collision.
The force of impact in a car crash causes huge amounts of energy to be converted through friction into extremely high temperatures. Within a fraction of a second, fibres in the clothes of the vehicle's occupants melt and fuse with the plastic of the panels and pedals they impact with. The result, fibre and plastic fusion marks left on the car and on the clothing.
You can expect to find them when there's massive damage to the vehicle and an injury to the occupants. Fibroblastic fusions and plastic coating marks are formed at the point of collision. They can, under certain circumstances, give us highly significant positional information about the occupants of a car at the time of the collision, since they're formed in a very, very split second. In order to demonstrate the type of force that's involved in creating a fibroblastic fusion, we have a plastic panel here that's from a car, and we have this polyester cotton garment. So the intention is what we're going to do is put the garment over the top of the plastic panel like so. We're going to ask Jack here to hit this combination as hard as he can with this rather large sledgehammer he has, and hopefully we should just about generate the amount of energy required to produce the marks. Yeah, success. You can see here on the screen that these fibres have completely melted and fused into the plastic of the panel. And there's sufficient intact material present that we would actually cut off and mount onto a microscope for further analysis.
If Ray and his team of forensic investigators could find plastic fusion marks like these inside the Frontera, then they could begin to work out who was driving.
If you don't know what you're looking for, they're easily overlooked. When we looked at the plastic panels on the passenger footwell, we found a fibroblastic fusion mark which contained intact blue fibres.
Ray's next job was to work out whose clothes these fibres had come from, and Milton, who claimed to be the passenger, or Michael Wall.
We removed some of the intact ones and just performed a standard fibre analysis and comparison with the fibres comprising the male occupant's socks. And the conclusion was that his socks had been in contact with the panel, the passenger side footwell panel.
It now seemed Michael Wall was the passenger and not Anne Milton. To be certain, Ray began the same analysis of the driver's side footwell.
On the brake pedal cover of the Frontera, we found a mark, a brown plastic coating mark. And under further analysis, we found that this mark consisted of polyurethane, which matched the material on the female occupant's boots. But in addition, a closer examination of her left boot showed there was a plastic coating mark which matched the design and pattern of the brake pedal cover itself.
Fibres from Michael Wall's sock placed him in the passenger seat, while plastic coating marks from the brake pedal on Anne Milton's shoe puts her at the steering wheel and proved she was lying.
Putting the findings in that context, we were able to actually say that, yes, the female occupant was driving at the time of the collision.
Police charged Anne Milton with causing death by dangerous driving and driving while disqualified. She pleaded guilty and was jailed for 7.5 years.
If the forensic experts had not been able to find this fibre fusion evidence, there's no doubt that Anne Milton would have got away with it. She would have not been brought to trial. She certainly wouldn't have been convicted. And you know, nobody would have known that she was responsible for this terrible crash.
For Ray and his team, cases like this provide more than just job satisfaction.
It's a satisfying feeling, yes. It principally shows the value of forensic science and how it can be useful to the criminal justice system. And above all, in tragic cases like this where someone's died, is giving closure to the family as well.
When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time.
Expert witnesses are the golden thread that runs through cases that every single conviction needs.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
There are so many important pieces of evidence: paint evidence, glass, fibre evidence.
They search harder and look deeper using the very latest techniques.
If I can work out how old those insects are, that's going to give me the minimum time since death.
This is the inside story of how science helps solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
It really was becoming the last throw of the dice.
Nothing's going to bring her back, but she'd had the justice that she rightly deserved.
This is the story of the expert witness. In this episode, we reveal how the tenacity of a team of forensic scientists helped finally catch the killer of 2 children in Brighton.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can now go to my grave knowing that we have justice for my little girl.
And on moorland near Bradford, expert analysis of human remains reveals details of how one couple planned and carried out a brutal murder.
At first, the police thought the bones were animal bones until an expert witness was able to identify that these were in fact human remains.
There are so many important pieces of evidence that all play their part. We should consider them as a kind of a product rather than a sum, so one piece doesn't add to the next, it actually multiplies.
Brighton, 1986. 2 9-year-old girls, Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, have disappeared. Expert witness Roy Green was working at a forensics lab as a junior scientist. 25 years later, he would be the man who helped solve the case.
It was on the news and it's very, quite high profile. But actually, the victims lived in the same part of Brighton that I used to live when I was a student. I've had thousands of cases over my career as a forensic scientist. But every now and again, one will come along that really has quite a personal effect, a personal resonance with me.
The case became known as Babes in the Wood, after the woodland at Wild Park where the girls' bodies were discovered. For journalist Chris Summers, it was one of the most harrowing cases he has ever covered.
This is Wild Park, which is obviously quite a large area. It's, a really attractive place for a kid who lives at Molscombe, just on the other side of the road, but it is a very busy main road, and Karen and Nicola were specifically not allowed to come here to play. Their parents would prefer them to play, within sight of the house. The case was, a case of 2 little girls who went out to play after school or in the evening, and they just never came home.
Nicola's father, Barry, will never forget the moment he found out the girls were missing.
She was very, very prompt with Thursday nights. I said, they'll be home in a minute. You've got EastEnders, you've got Top of the Pops. They're not going to miss them, are they? And then, come to 8 o'clock, got a bit worried then. I said, we better phone the police, This is more serious than we think.
When the girls were reported missing, the police immediately organised a massive search and involved volunteers from the local community.
For 24 hours or so, the 2 little girls were missing. It was a huge manhunt. They were looking in houses and back gardens and eventually in Wild Park as well.
The following day, the girls were found.
Police in Brighton have discovered the bodies of 2 small girls who disappeared yesterday evening.
I'll remember it forever now. There's 3 policemen come in, and the little man in the middle said, "I'm afraid to say that Nicola's been found and she's dead." Why? Why them? Who?
Detectives were already suspicious of one man, Russell Bishop. He was a local who had helped with the search, but displayed some unusual behaviour.
Wild Park, it's an enormous area. They could be anywhere here. Russell Bishop happened to run in the direction of where the bodies were found. And obviously, that was more than curious to the police.
Various witness statements put Bishop near the scene of the crime. And there was further evidence. A blue sweatshirt found on a path between the park and Moulsecoomb railway station.
The sweatshirt was a blue, quite grubby, paint smears on it, and it was handed in. And then it became more important because it got identified as possibly coming from Russell Bishop.
Investigators found blue fibres matching the sweatshirt at the scene of the crime. Bishop was tried for murder, but pleaded not guilty. He claimed the sweatshirt was not his, and there was little forensic evidence to prove otherwise.
This was the mid-80s. DNA was in its infancy, so the evidence against him was, fairly circumstantial. It was inferences about, where he'd been and what he'd said to people. But very crucial to that, there was a lot of questions about that time of death.
The girls had been seen alive up until 6:30 p.m. An eyewitness also claimed to have seen Bishop leaving the park at that time.
The time of death is crucial. If the defence could prove that, he was seen somewhere else at the time that the girls are believed to have died, then, he couldn't be guilty.
And so the judge directed, if the jury felt that the girls were alive at a certain time, then they must acquit. So it really didn't matter what evidence was there forensically, they didn't get a chance to consider it.
The police's case collapsed after that. I said, "This ain't looking good, mate. I'm starting to believe that you're not going to find this man guilty. I don't think you're pushing it enough." And as the consequence is that he was found not guilty.
The case remained unsolved, but 3 years later, Bishop was under investigation again, this time for an attack on a young girl. She was left for dead, but survived. Evidence found by Roy Green helped secure a conviction.
We found DNA on an item he'd thrown away that matched Bishop and matched the victim. And so that helped to provide the evidence which convicted him.
There was a lot of similarities, but you can't convict people just on, a crime being similar. You had to have something more than that.
In 2003, changes to the law allowed some cases to be retried. So, police once again attempted to prosecute Bishop for the murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. But their evidence was considered insufficient for a retrial. Then in 2011, advances in forensic science gave detectives new hope, and they reopened the case, but it wouldn't be easy.
With this case, Bishop had already been acquitted. If the case has been tried before at court, you're in what's called a double jeopardy, which means that you have to have new and compelling evidence. All your ducks have to be in a row before you can go, because you only get one shot.
Roy began with a new examination of the sweatshirt. He found DNA on the cuff and matched it to Bishop. But 25 years of investigation had created a problem.
An important part of the process is checking the reliability of it. And another of my colleagues was specifically tasked with doing this for every item. And it was her view that because of the processes that had carried on and the way in which the item had been handled and treated and passed about and examined with other things previously, that you couldn't necessarily say that the piece of DNA that we got there because it was part of the crime rather than being transferred by some other method.
But Roy was not about to give up. Instead, he began a search for new fibre evidence.
This is a comparator. And basically you've got two microscopes that are identical. And what that allows you to do is get two fibres that you think might match alongside each other, and then you can compare them, seeing them both at the same time, and then you can apply different lighting to them. So we would apply white light, blue light and UV light and compare them and see if they match under all circumstances.
Roy hoped to use fibre analysis to prove that Russell Bishop did indeed own the controversial blue sweatshirt by linking it to other items in his possession.
We found that there were blue acrylics which could have come from the sweatshirt on his trousers, and there were patchy peach acrylic fibres found on the sweatshirt which were present on a pair of socks at his house. There were links to items that we know Bishop had worn, but also to this item that he says he hasn't worn or doesn't know anything about. It's not his, and yet there were fibres there that linked him to it.
Roy had found the first ever evidence to show Russell Bishop did own the sweatshirt. He now looked for more fibre evidence to link the garment to the bodies of the two girls.
So we've got pink polyesters from Nicola's jumper found on the sweatshirt, and we've got blue acrylics from the sweatshirt found on the jumper.
In forensics, the more fibre links you can find, the better. It's painstaking work, and it can't be rushed.
When you look at fibre evidence, you say, OK, so there's fibres on this item that match that item. How could that happen? Well, either the two items have been in contact, or this person's come into contact with another source of those fibres that just happen to be the same. The more links you have, and if you have cross links going both ways, the stronger the evidence becomes, because it multiplies the number of coincidences until they become, so many that they test credibility.
Roy continued to study the sweatshirt and began an analysis of paint stains on the sleeve.
Flakes of matching that paint were found on the tapings of Karen Hadaway's clothes. And so it became clear, really, that whoever had murdered the girls had worn the sweatshirt.
Roy was building a new and compelling forensic case against Russell Bishop. Meanwhile, detectives uncovered a new lead themselves. 25 years earlier, one key witness said they saw Bishop leave the park while the girls were still alive. But now, a new witness had come forward.
There was a crucial witness that they discovered in their new inquiry who remembered seeing Bishop going back into the park. It suggested that the timeline at the first trial may have been all wrong, and that could prove, and did prove, absolutely vital.
Detectives now had evidence Bishop was in the park at the time of the girls' death. They had fibre evidence linking the sweatshirt to the bodies and proof that the sweatshirt belonged to him. But thanks to modern science, Roy had one more damning piece of evidence to offer.
During the post-mortem, the pathologist took tapings of exposed skin areas from the girls. We found some cellular material, and we cut that out and submitted it for DNA profiling. And when the results came back, they showed that Karen Hadaway's DNA was there, but it was also DNA from someone else.
Detectives ran the sample through the national database and found a match. Russell Bishop. In 2018, 32 years after Karen and Nicola had been murdered, he was back in the dock. It took Roy Green 3 days to deliver all his evidence.
There was never an eyewitness or a smoking gun. It was all forensic evidence, which together made it clear to the jury that Bishop was guilty.
There was paint, there was fibres, there was hairs. But not only that, But we had DNA evidence, and that was extremely strong.
Russell Bishop was at last found guilty of the double murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. He was sentenced to life in prison.
This is a memorial that's been constructed quite recently, maybe 200 yards from the main road. It's really heartbreaking how close they were to their sanctuary of their homes. You can imagine for the parents how awful it was. It's been so many years before they actually got the right man. There was always that doubt until the final moment.
It is satisfying to be able to kind of know that you played a part in helping to solve a case. And that's always good because it provides closure for victims' families, and that's really why I'm in it.
Roy Green knew what he was talking about. The evidence was irrefutable. I can't thank the man enough. You know, what a clever man. Him and all the people around him. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can now go to my grave knowing that we have justice for my little girl. And it's justice that is well deserved.
Skeletal remains, they can survive for thousands of years potentially, so the manner in which a body is disposed of, concealed, buried, will leave traces of evidence on the skeleton which can be used to interpret what's happened to the body after death.
March 1997. Oxenhope Moor, North Yorkshire. Bones are found in a lay-by. Criminal psychologist Ruth Tully followed the case with interest.
At first, the police thought the bones were animal bones until an expert witness was able to identify that these were in fact human remains. Tragic, tragic case. I often work with people with serious violence convictions and also appear in the court as an expert witness. And what's really interesting about this case is that the way events transpired, a murderer was left on the streets for up to a decade.
Detectives had the bones, but little else to go on. Roy Lambert is a major crimes detective and knows well the challenge of cases like this one.
Scenes where bones are found and nothing much else, they can be very, very difficult to try and identify. As an investigator, you need a starting point. If you can't identify who they are, where do you go looking?
Detectives had a silent witness. Now they needed to reveal its story. Was it someone who died on the moor from natural causes, or something more sinister? They turned to expert witness and forensic osteologist Martin Everson.
The principal role of forensic osteology is to provide a profile of the individual from the skeleton. The less material you have and the more damaged it is, the less you can say and the less precision with which you can say it. You just have to make do with what you have.
Martin began by assessing the extent of the bones that had been recovered.
So in this case, we'd evidently got a partial skeleton. It was incomplete. The skull and mandible, jaw, were missing. The upper limbs were missing. The lower limbs were missing below the mid-shaft of the femur, or thigh bones, of both the left and right side. So these were the remains of a torso.
As Martin studied the remains more closely, he uncovered a first clue.
The value of the pelvis in estimating or assigning the sex is enormous because of the key biological difference between men and women, which is that women give birth and hence they require a relatively open birth canal. And in this instance, the pelvis was clearly that
of a robustly built adult male.
Martin was also able to reveal to detectives an indication of when this man died.
There was a little bit of dry, soft tissue left on some of the bones, but typically this partial skeleton was very clean, suggesting that it was some time since death, at least months probably.
But as his forensic analysis continued, Martin discovered shocking evidence of a dark end to the man's life.
There were signs that the femurs, the thigh bones, had been chopped through. There were also signs of burning on the bones. So that suggested to me that an attempt had been made to burn the torso. The remaining evidence on the skeleton was indicative of an attempt to dispose of the body by dismemberment and burning.
It was now clear to detectives that they were dealing with murder.
Cases like this highlight just how important evidence is for effective investigation. If the police didn't know what had happened to the body, they'd have much fewer clues to go on and perhaps not even have an accurate timeline of what had happened.
Martin concluded the body had been left on the moor months earlier. Police now knew when the crime had taken place, but still had no idea who the victim was. And in 1996, science could not yet identify DNA from the badly burnt bones. The case ran cold for nearly a decade.
It's one thing the police having a body, but identifying the body is a different matter. That breakthrough didn't come until 8 long years later in 2004, when DNA techniques had developed further. These breakthroughs in DNA and technologies are essential for effective investigation.
Scientists were now able to identify DNA from the tiniest of traces, and when they took samples from the bones this time, they detected a profile. A comparison with the police database confirmed the skeleton was that of 49-year-old Lenny Fulberg.
Lenny Fulberg was a Tyneside man, known locally as a wheeler dealer, and he had many children. Some reports say up to 32, some say up to 50, but clearly he had a big family.
Lenny Fulberg had a substantial rap sheet with convictions for dishonesty, violence and indecency.
With regards to victims' background, really, as a police investigator, it doesn't matter. We should treat everybody as equal and do our utmost to find out who's responsible.
The identification gave the case a brand new line of inquiry. Fulberg had been released from prison in 1996, just months before the body was found. Police began to investigate Fulberg's previous relationships.
Investigations led to Lenny's former partner, Tracy Cameron, and her new partner, Graham Haylett. Lenny and Tracy had children, but when Lenny was remanded into custody in 1996, she started an affair with Graham.
Investigators found out from Fulberg's family that on his release from prison, he had made arrangements to meet Tracy in Bradford.
It's reported that Tracy asked Lenny to meet her on the pretense of discussing access to their shared children.
No one had any contact with Lenny after this meeting. Police grew increasingly suspicious.
If you're fortunate enough to identify the owner of these bones, it really opens up the investigation. In the case of Lenny Fulberg, it then gave the investigators the opportunity to look back at his movements, his history. They found he'd gone missing. They looked at his associations with his partner and the fact that partner had got another boyfriend now, and then the case started to unravel.
Detectives discovered letters between Tracy Cameron and her new partner Graham Haylett. These made clear their anger at Fulberg for his past crimes, Tracy's fear for the safety of her children, and a plot by the pair to murder Fulberg. Evidence from expert witness Martin Everson revealed how they disposed of the body.
So we found classic features of dismemberment. This type of analysis really is about trying to understand the circumstances or means of deposition and disposal. So we found 7 skeletal elements that showed evidence of cut marks, and these were very distinctive. So there were V-shaped cut marks, which is typically caused by a sharp bladed instrument such as a knife, and also several indicators that a saw was used.
In 2006, Tracy Cameron and Graham Haylett were tried for murder. The letters they exchanged showed their actions were premeditated. Martin's forensic evidence revealed the lengths they took to cover up their crime and to hide the victim's identity for 8 years.
A good witness, they must be good in the witness box and talk in a language that the jury understands and be convincing. Because it's no point in spending thousands and thousands of pounds on an expert witness if they can't deliver the evidence in the witness box. It's really important that they present the evidence in an understandable way to the jury, but in the witness box, they've got to come across in layman's language and convince the jury that their evidence is strong and believable.
I think in this case, osteological analysis was a unique component. This was a deliberate attempt to dismember and dispose of the body. It would have required a degree of planning and shows that an attempt was made to conceal the crime. Not dimensions of a person's behaviour that can be associated with some kind of psychopathology.
Martin's evidence convinced the jury that the murder of Lenny Fulberg was a cold and calculated act. The pair were found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years.
It's reported that Tracy and Graham killed Lenny after they found out that he'd been in prison for child sexual offences. So on one hand, this could have been a vigilante-style attack, but on the other hand, this could have been a misguided way that Tracy thought that she was protecting her own children from their father. If it wasn't for the work of the expert witness, we'd never have known how the bones were attempted to be disposed of. And on top of that, if it wasn't for the hard work of the police, we'd never have known who attempted to dispose of them.